Welcome to Creep, where the road ahead is always darker than it seems. Tonight, we dive into the shadowy corners of desolate highways, forgotten by time and haunted by something far worse than loneliness. Each story you're about to hear comes from the lips of those who survived, or claimed they did. 5 chilling tales of eerie encounters on the open road that will make you question every mile you've ever traveled in the dead of night. So, buckle up, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself, because sometimes the most terrifying things don't wait for you at the destination. They find you on the way there. Let's begin. It was late. Later than I planned. The kind of late when you start to wonder if you'll ever make it home. I was driving down a stretch of highway I'd traveled dozens of times before. A rural road, quiet and empty at night, with only the occasional flicker of a streetlight to break the darkness. I had just left a late meeting in town and was heading back to my place, a small house tucked away in the woods, about an hour outside the city. It was a familiar route, one I'd grown used to over the years, but that night something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too deep. Around the halfway point, there's this one spot where the road bends sharply to the left. It's always been a place I've had a strange feeling about, but I never thought much of it, until that night. As I rounded the curve, I saw them. At first, it was just a flicker at the edge of my headlights. My mind told me it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection or a shadow. But as I got closer, I realized it was something, or someone, standing just off the side of the road. A figure, tall and unnervingly still. I slammed on the brakes, but before I could stop completely, the figure darted into the trees, moving so quickly it almost seemed unnatural. I was shaken, my heart racing. I considered pulling over, but I quickly talked myself out of it. I had no reason to get involved, and honestly, I didn't want to be any closer to whatever that thing was. I sped up, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. But as I continued driving, I kept catching glimpses of something in the rearview mirror, eyes staring at me from the dark. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. I couldn't shake it. The longer I drove, the more I noticed it. Those eyes, every time I glanced in the mirror, they were there watching me closer each time. It was like they were following me, but I couldn't see the person, only those eyes glowing faintly in the dark. My pulse quickened. I reached for my phone to call someone, but the signal was dead. I cursed under my breath, trying to ignore the panic that was creeping in. I focused on the road, on the faint yellow lines marking the way, but every now and then, I would glance back and those eyes were still there. I was nearing the exit that would take me off the highway and into the town, where the streetlights were bright, and the safety of the crowd would help me breathe again. But just as I approached the turnoff, I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. No followed. I couldn't see the figure anymore, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. That's when I heard it, a knock, soft but unmistakable, coming from the back of my car. I nearly swerved off the road in shock. I looked through the rearview mirror again, my hands gripping the wheel tight, my eyes darting across the empty stretch of road behind me. There was nothing, but the sound persisted. Knock, knock. It was coming from inside the car, but not from anywhere I could see. It was as though it was coming from underneath, somewhere in the darkness of the road below. I thought for sure I was losing my mind. I finally hit the exit, turning onto the well-lit streets of town. The moment I passed the welcome sign, I looked back. No eyes, no figure, nothing at all. I felt a brief sense of relief. But even now, every time I drive that road, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me, waiting at the curve. I haven't driven that stretch at night since, and I don't think I ever will again. It was late, somewhere around 2:30 a.m., and I was driving down I-20, heading east through the endless stretch of Texas highway. The road was as empty as I had expected. Just me and the occasional rumble of the engine in the otherwise silent night. The headlights barely pierced through the heavy darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd been on the road for hours, tired but determined to make it to Dallas by morning. The endless stretches of desert and empty fields had become monotonous, but I was used to it. What I wasn't used to was the sudden flash of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car speeding up to pass me, but the car didn't pass. Instead, it kept pace with me, just a little too close, too consistent. I tried to ignore it, convinced it was nothing more than a figment of my fatigue. But when I looked again, the car was closer, dangerously so. It felt like they were tailing me, and I had no idea why. I sped up, hoping to lose them, but they matched my speed, almost as if they knew exactly what I was doing. I made the mistake of speeding up even more, hoping to get some distance, but just as I was about to pull away, the other car's headlights blinked off, disappearing into the pitch blackness behind me. Now! I was genuinely freaked out. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. There was something about the whole situation that didn't sit right. It was as though the driver wanted me to know they were there. But now, all I could feel was the creeping sense that I wasn't alone. I finally convinced myself to stop at the next rest area, hoping to shake off the nervous energy. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a figure standing by the side of the building. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dirty jacket and jeans. His face was obscured by the shadows of the dim lights, but I could feel his gaze, even from the distance. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but something about this man felt wrong. He didn't belong there. It wasn't just the fact that it was the middle of nowhere. No, it was more than that. He was standing perfectly still, not moving an inch, his body rigid as if he was waiting for something or someone. I got out of the car, trying to shake off the growing anxiety. Maybe I was just overthinking it, but the closer I got to the rest area, the more I realized that the man wasn't just standing there. He was staring at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. I tried to walk past him, hoping he wouldn't notice, but as I neared him, I heard his voice. Soft, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The voice had no warmth to it, no humanity. It was hollow, empty, like something not entirely alive. Before I could respond or even react, I heard the sound of tires screeching behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat, to see a car speeding off from the parking lot, its headlights blinding me for a moment. The man didn't move an inch, still staring at me as if I was the one who had just stepped into his world. I turned back to him, my mouth dry. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, but before he could answer, a dark, chilling laugh echoed in the night air, unnatural and wrong. It felt like the laughter came from everywhere, not just a man. Without thinking, I ran back to my car, heart pounding, and locked the doors behind me. I didn't look back. I started the engine, and within seconds, I was back on the road, speeding away from that rest area as fast as I could. I never saw the man again, but as I drove through the rest of Texas, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And that car, the one that had tailed me earlier, I could have sworn I saw its headlights in the distance, still following. Every time I drive down I-20 now, I feel that same unease, the weight of eyes on me, always just out of sight, waiting for me to slow down. And I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what happened that night, but I can't shake the thought that whatever was out there was still out there. It was one of those nights when the fog clings to the road like a living thing. I was driving alone on the M5, heading south towards Bristol. It was just after midnight, and the road was eerily quiet, with only my car's headlights cutting through the thick mist. I had been on this stretch of motorway 100 times, but tonight felt different. There was an odd heaviness in the air, like the entire world was holding its breath. I'd been driving for a while when I noticed a car behind me. At first, I thought it was just another vehicle, perhaps coming up to pass me, but it wasn't moving fast enough. In fact, it had been there for a while, maintaining the exact same distance, too close for comfort. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the fog had already swallowed most of the details of the car. Just faint headlights, glowing like distant stars. I tried to push it out of my mind and focused on the road ahead, but then, as if in response to my discomfort, the car's headlights flickered. Once, twice. A strange pattern, like the driver was trying to communicate something. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. It was unsettling, but I figured it was just a malfunctioning vehicle. I tried to speed up, hoping to put some distance between myself and whatever was behind me. But no matter how fast I drove, the car stayed right there, just behind me. Its headlights were like a persistent shadow, always at my rear. The strange thing was, the longer I drove, the further I seemed to be from any other vehicles. The M5 is busy, even at night, but there was no one else in sight. It was as if we were the only two cars left on the entire motorway. Then, the strangest thing happened. The car behind me, the one that had been tailing me for miles, suddenly disappeared. One moment, the headlights were there, and the next, they were gone. I glanced in the mirror, confused, but there was no sign of it anywhere. No brake lights, no sudden turn-off, nothing. It was as if the car had simply vanished into thin air. I didn't know what to think. Was I just exhausted? Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me after a long drive. But as I kept going, the fog thickened, and something in the distance caught my eye. Another set of headlights coming from far ahead. It was hard to make out, but they were unmistakably there, and they were heading straight towards me. I slowed down, thinking I might be nearing another car or perhaps a service area. But as I got closer, the headlights didn't seem to move, almost as if they were fixed, standing still. As I approached them, I felt an intense, growing sense of dread. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see the road in front of me, let alone the source of the lights. But the closer I got, the more I realized. The car was not moving. I pulled my vehicle to a stop about 50 feet away. The headlights were still glaring at me, but there was no sign of a driver, no movement at all. I turned off my own headlights, trying to gather my thoughts, my mind racing. My stomach churned, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I didn't know why, but everything about the situation screamed wrong. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the car flickered. The headlights blinked off, as though someone had just turned them off. And there, sitting in the fog, was an empty patch of road where the car had been. No signs of a crash, no tire marks. Just the same stretch of M5, empty and still. I didn't wait to investigate further. I turned my car around, speeding away as fast as I could. The feeling that something was watching me, something not entirely human, didn't fade until I reached the nearest town. The fog, the headlights, the car that vanished, it all stayed with me, haunting my every thought. I haven't driven that stretch of the M5 again. Every time I think about it, I wonder if that car was ever really there, or if it was something else, something that shouldn't exist. But I know one thing for sure. Whatever it was waiting for me out there in the fog, and it might still be. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I had just finished a long day of work in San Francisco. I was heading back home to Los Angeles, taking the usual route down Highway 101. The sun had set hours ago, and the only light now came from the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The highway was fairly empty at that hour, and I was starting to feel the exhaustion from the long drive. It had been a few hours, and the rhythm of the road was lulling me into a daze when something out of the ordinary caught my eye. Up ahead, just beyond the curve, I saw what looked like a flickering light. At first, I thought it might be a car in the distance, its headlights playing tricks with the fog. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a car at all. It was a cluster of bright, white lights in the sky, hovering above the road. They were too high to be streetlights, and they weren't moving like any airplane or helicopter I'd ever seen. I slowed down, the eerie sight drawing me in, unsure of what I was seeing. The lights were still and steady, flickering at random intervals. There was no sound, just complete silence, the kind that made everything feel even more unsettling. The lights seemed to pulse, not like a traditional flash, but like they were breathing, expanding and contracting in the night sky. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, my curiosity outweighing my fear. I had no idea what I was looking at, but there was something hypnotic about it. The longer I stared, the stranger it seemed, like the lights were not part of this world. They shifted colors from bright white to pale blue and then a faint green, as if they were communicating with each other in some kind of pattern I couldn't understand. I grabbed my phone, trying to get a picture or video of the strange phenomenon. But when I looked at the screen, nothing appeared. The camera just showed blackness. I tried again and again, but no matter what I did, the lights never showed up on my phone. That's when things took an even stranger turn. As I watched, a few of the lights began to move, slowly at first, just drifting across the sky. But then they began moving faster, darting back and forth in erratic patterns, almost like they were playing some sort of aerial game. I couldn't keep up with them, my eyes darting back and forth, unable to focus on any one light for more than a second. It was like they were teasing me, moving just out of reach, but always staying in my line of sight. I don't know how long I stood there watching, but at some point, the light stopped moving. Everything went silent, and for a brief moment, it felt like time itself had frozen. Then, without warning, the lights blinked out, one by one, until there was nothing left but the dark sky above me. I sat there for a while, too stunned to do anything. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking. I had no idea what I just witnessed, and no explanation for it. The air around me felt thick, almost oppressive, like the atmosphere itself had changed. After what felt like an eternity, I got back in the car and continued my drive. I kept my eyes on the road, my mind still spinning, trying to rationalize what I had seen. But the further I drove, the more I started to doubt myself. Was it some kind of trick, some bizarre weather phenomenon? Or had I truly seen something beyond explanation? I never spoke to anyone about it. No one would have believed me anyway. But every time I drive down Highway 101, I can't help but look up at the sky, wondering if I'll see those strange lights again. And part of me wonders if they were waiting for me to look away, to see just how far they'd go. It was the summer of 1992, and I had just arrived in Peru, excited to explore a country rich in history and culture. I'd signed up for a guided tour, and we were heading towards the highlands in a large, cramped bus with other tourists from around the world. The road was narrow, winding through the Andes, with steep cliffs on one side and the occasional breathtaking view of the valleys below. The journey was peaceful, with only the sound of the engine and the chatter of tourists filling the air. We were about 2 hours into the trip when something changed. I noticed a few other vehicles on the road, but they seemed out of place. Old trucks and cars that looked like they had been abandoned for years. The air seemed to shift. The atmosphere became tense, like a storm was about to break. I looked out of the window, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had started creeping over me. Suddenly, without warning, a loud series of gunshots shattered the calm. I remember the sound of bullets hitting the side of the bus, the sharp crack of metal against metal. The bus swerved violently, and I could hear people screaming in panic. It all happened so fast. At first, I had no idea what was going on. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then the shots kept coming, more intense, closer. There was no doubt. We were under attack. I looked out the window again, and that's when I saw them, masked men, armed with rifles, standing in the middle of the road and opening fire on us. The terror hit me like a cold wave. I recognized them from the news. Members of Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, a terrorist group responsible for violence across the country at the time. They had intercepted our bus, and they were determined to stop us. The bus lurched forward, and I saw the driver, a middle-aged man with a grim expression, slam his foot down on the accelerator. The bus shot forward like a rocket, the tires screeching on the rough road. I could hear the deafening sound of gunfire behind us, the bullets thudding against the rear windows and the body of the bus. People were panicking. Some were screaming, some were crying, and a few were ducking under their seats, trying to shield themselves from the onslaught. My body felt frozen, but my mind was racing. I couldn't believe what was happening. The driver, though, seemed determined. He gripped the wheel with both hands, his knuckles white, and pushed the bus faster. The engine roared, and we swerved around tight curves, narrowly avoiding falling off the cliffside. Through the rear window, I saw the men in the distance, chasing after us in their trucks. The gunfire didn't stop. It was as if the world had gone insane in the blink of an eye. I looked around, and I could see that some people were bleeding, their faces pale with fear and shock. I could barely hear anything over the roar of the engine and the sound of the tires screeching as the driver pushed the bus to its limits. Minutes passed like hours, but the driver didn't falter. We flew down that winding highway, every second feeling like a desperate attempt to outrun death. At one point, the bus careened around a corner so fast that I thought for sure we were going to tip over. But the driver held steady, his focus unwavering. The pursuit felt endless. But after what felt like a lifetime, the gunfire finally started to fade. I peered out the window, and I could see that the trucks had fallen behind. We had gained some distance. The adrenaline, the fear, and the disbelief started to flood out of me, replaced by a hollow, exhausted relief. I didn't know how we had managed to outrun them, but somehow we had. The driver kept going, never slowing down until we reached the nearest police station, where we finally came to a stop. My legs were shaking, and I couldn't seem to breathe properly. I glanced around the bus. There were a few wounded, but miraculously, no one had been killed. As the police officers rushed towards the bus, helping the injured and ushering us out, I could feel the weight of what had just happened sinking in. I didn't speak to anyone for a while. I couldn't. I was in shock. The world outside seemed normal again, but inside, I was still on that road, still running from those masked men. It took a long time before I was able to wrap my head around the fact that I had survived something so terrifying. And even now, years later, I can still hear the sound of the gunshots and the roar of the engine, as if they were imprinted on my mind forever. That night, I learned what fear truly was, and I'll never forget the faces of those men, the ones who tried to stop us, and the sound of the engine, desperately trying to outrun death. Well, that's all for today, my friends. I hope you're sitting down and checking the locks on your doors, because these stories certainly have a way of making us question what's out there on the roads at night, don't they? Remember, sometimes the most terrifying experiences aren't the ones we can see, but the ones we can't explain. Stay safe out there, and never forget, some roads lead to places you never want to go. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back with more terrifying tales that will make you question every mile you drive. And remember, this is Creep, where fear is just a drive away. Until next time, keep your lights on and your eyes open,